ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you, of course. Another one of my patented year-end list for you. I did one last week for my most underrated films of the year. This time around, I'm going to give you guys my top 10 horror movies of the year. There were a lot of really underrated, great horror thriller films this year. Then I'm going to shout out a few of those, and then a few that were a little more mainstream. But I think this list encapsulates a really, really good year for horror. A heavy lean on the religious demon horror. By the way, 2024 was the return of the demon. We'll talk about that a little bit too. Let's get into the list. All right, first up, as I always do, I do want to give you some honorable mentions. I'm also going to put down at the bottom of the screen on the third where you can view the film. Or if it's playing in theaters, I'll mention that as well. Some of these films are available to stream or rent on demand, and I highly recommend that you watch all of them if you are a horror fan. To start us out, my first honorable mention is Chris Nash's In a Violent Nature. I love the premise of this film, and I think it's going to actually be an historic moment in horror where the POV is going to change a little bit and not always follow the victims or the teenagers that are being stalked, but follow the killer, the stalker himself. And that's the shtick with this movie. It follows a Jason Voorhees-esque killer, and we see the world through his eyes. In a Violent Nature also has the #1 best on-screen kill of the entire year. Next up would be one that would fall in the horror comedy realm. It's also really sweet. Lisa Frankenstein. Directed by the late Robin Williams' daughter, Zelda Williams, the film stars Catherine Newton, who is quickly becoming a horror scream queen in her own right. It's a modern kind of pop spin on the classic Frankenstein story. And there were actually quite a few of these this year, and this is probably my favorite among them. A lot of people call it monster fucking. I guess that's a genre now, but I dug Lisa Frankenstein. I also want to give a shout out to not only one of my favorite horror films of the year, but the best marketing campaign that I have seen maybe in my life, especially for a horror movie, Osgood Perkins' Longlegs. This is the film that will be at the top of a lot of people's list, but I think for me it just fell a little bit short of the hype, because the hype for this movie was off the charts. The marketing campaign and the little 30-second teasers they released every couple weeks, Neon Studios putting in the work to get people out to the cinema to see this thing, and it was a great film. It was a crime thriller with an explosive performance from Micah Monroe in this movie, who is also, like I said with Catherine Newton, kind of cementing herself in the horror genre. A batshit insane transformative performance from Nicolas Cage in this movie as the titular Longlegs. It played on the tropes of movies like Silence of the Lambs and Seven, which I'm a huge fan of, and this is another entry into that serial killer FBI investigative drama / horror. And a very underseen horror movie I'm also going to give an honorable mention to, You'll Never Find Me. This is one that I talked about on my video last week where I gave you the most underrated movies of the year. This is a chamber piece. It takes place in one location and features only 2 actors. The young girl is a hitchhiker who has gotten lost and finds herself at this man's trailer in the middle of the night, a stormy night. He lets her in, and then we have to decide if she's the victim or if there's something else even more substantial going on at play here. Is he a good guy? Is he somebody we should be afraid of? It's a very Hitchcockian film that just not enough people are talking about. It is streaming on Shudder if you want to check it out. And then my last honorable mention will also be a film that's currently streaming on Shudder called Oddity. This is one of the more beautiful looking horror movies of the year, and frankly, it is one of the more unsettling films I saw all year too. There's a murder that takes place in the movie, and the victim's twin sister, who is a psychic medium, comes to the home to kind of investigate paranormally what happened to her sister. Intense, baffling things happen in this home. It proves to be a haunted house type of feel with some imagery that'll stick with you forever. All right, and now on to the countdown. My number 10 is a movie that is also available to currently stream on Shudder called Mads. Mads is a French horror film from director David Moreau. It's a 90-minute film that is one continuous shot. And it also draws you in as the viewer as to what these proceedings are. What are we exactly witnessing? And I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is a outbreak kind of zombie type film. Think of like a 28 Days Later type scenario. But the way it's shot and the way you are following these would-be victims, these would-be turned zombies, and seeing their turns slowly progress as you're literally biting your nails. And then once they transform, how the camera is almost like a baton in a race, and it gets handed off to the next person that we're following. It is an absolutely tremendous watch that is unlike anything, frankly, I've ever seen. I mentioned In a Violent Nature earlier before. What that did with the kind of camp slasher is what Mads is doing for the zombie infected outbreak genre. Another film that I feel like is way too underseen is a film called Stop Motion. It's directed by Robert Morgan, who is actually a lifelong stop motion artist himself. And what he does with this movie is he films a girl who is slowly breaking with the reality after losing her mother. Her mother and her work together in stop motion art, which is what her mother did for a living. So when she passes away, the daughter decides to finish the film that they were working on. But what ends up happening from a horror perspective, and as the audience member watching it, is the reality and the lines begin to get blurred from what's in the stop motion project that she's working on and what is in her real life. And that includes certain characters that come into the picture without spoiling anything. Are they real, or are they in her imagination in this world that she's creating? Or they're really her mother created that she's continuing as a legacy? It gives some of the most creepy imagery of the year. It is a bit of a slow burn, and you're not going to find a ton of kills in this movie. But this movie is just like a really creepy, long Tool video with some great human performances in it as well. And it will keep you guessing. It is a mind-bending horror movie. I mentioned religious horror to start this in my intro, and that 2024 was the year of religious horror. We've got a run of them coming up right now. First up at number 8 is The First Omen for me. Nell Tiger Free, who I was initially introduced to in the M. Night Shyamalan Apple series Servant, gives a astounding performance in The First Omen. Not only is she giving a good acting performance, but she's carrying a horror legacy as she's asked to kind of play these different layers of the same character. The epitome of good as a nun, and the darkness that kind of succumbs to you under certain circumstances, the humanity within yourself, regardless of what you might want to be, what may take you over. There's also obviously the demonic and religious imagery all over the place in this film. It didn't quite live up to the original The Omen for me, but The First Omen was a film that I thought we didn't need when I heard about it being greenlit, and then after seeing it, I'm so glad we have it, if for no other reason than Tiger Free's performance. But the film on the religious horror spectrum is one of the best of the year for sure, and it'll stay with you for a long time. There's some really disturbing horror images in this movie that as a fan you should check out. We're keeping with the religious horror. My number 7 is the independent film Late Night with the Devil, also currently streaming on Shudder, by the way. David Dastmalchian finally steps out of that character actor role into a main leading star role in this film. He plays a talk show host in the 1970s who decides to have an exorcism performed on air during the Halloween special of his late night TV show. It turns into essentially The Exorcist on The Tonight Show. Think about it in those terms. It's shot from a found footage type of perspective, as it is supposedly tapes from the recordings of the actual broadcast that happened in the 1970s. There's some great practical effects in this film, especially in the last act of the movie. It does take a while to get going, but once it does, it really never lets up, and your eyes are just wide open the whole time. Dastmalchian carries the material perfectly. Also, young actress Ingrid Torelli gives a phenomenal performance in this movie as the possessed Lily. She's a little girl in the film, maybe 13 or 14 years old, and just blew me away with her performance. That's like she's been acting for decades, especially from like an independent movie type of situation. Late Night with the Devil is probably the best one that came out this year. Another religious horror film creeping in here. I told you guys, but my number 6 is Heretic. Now, this is a film, for those of you that have seen it, that might go, wait, that's not horror. I understand. It definitely toes the line between horror and thriller. But between me and you, I hate that debate. If a movie features horror elements in it, and especially if it's being tagged as a horror movie on like IMDb or Letterboxd, then it's a horror movie. Now, this movie is not from frame to frame, beginning to end, a horror film, and it doesn't feature a lot of the traditional tropes, but it is definitely a thrilling, religious journey that makes us question a lot of things within our own faith. The two female leads in the film, Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, are a tandem cannot be reckoned with this year. Maybe the best duo in any movie this year, the two of them bouncing off each other, and their different personalities playing to the immaculate Hugh Grant in this. He is beyond phenomenal. This is the best performance of his 30 plus year career. In my opinion, he has finally broken the mold from that rom-com English kind of good guy, aw shucks resume, and he's doing some weird, wild shit in the last few years where he's playing that eccentric horror villain, but he has just enough likability that you want to kind of stick around and see what he has to say, even though you might end up dead. Coming in at my number 5 is finally the last religious horror film on this list. My number 5 is Immaculate, Michael Mohan's religious nun film that's not The First Omen, that stars Miss Sydney Sweeney, who has quickly become America's sweetheart over the last couple years, from her acting in everything from rom-coms to her TV work in Euphoria. And in Immaculate, she takes another turn where she plays a nun who is dealing with the infiltration of demons and demonic entities within the convent that she has been called to in Italy. When we get to the final act of this film, of all the ones I just mentioned from a religious perspective, the imagery and the stunning swings that the director and the performers take in the final act of this movie still leaves me speechless. There's a sequence of about 10 minutes with Sydney Sweeney leading up to the end of the film, which, by the way, is probably the greatest on-screen scream in a film this year, where she just lets out her entire soul while she's covered in blood and a pretty horrific event has just taken place. It's a phenomenal picture that has a lot of great performances, cinematography, the score, everything about Immaculate, and I loved how it was quietly horrific too. It wasn't in your face like super horror tropes, with the exception of a couple jump scares that, honestly, based on what I'm saying, kind of felt out of place at the time. But it was also a little bit of a callback to this genre of exorcism and religious horror. So for that reason, I learned to love it even more in rewatches. My number 4 is a sequel from Mr. Parker Finn called Smile 2. Our opening sequence in this film, featuring Kyle Gallner, might be my favorite of the year from an opening sequence standpoint. It's up there in my top 5 opening maybe that's a video I should do. Naomi Scott in this film, in a horror sequel, guys, gives an Academy Award worthy performance. That's insane for me to even say, but she is tremendous in this, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with the psychology of having to go through something that these characters in these Smile movies go through. Not to take anything away from the first film, because I also really enjoyed that one, but Naomi Scott really took this material up a level, because I can remember when they greenlit the sequel, I go, well, that's cool. It's going to make $1 billion. It's going to be good for horror. But what else can we do with that premise? Naomi Scott elevated that material to where it became more than what it was about. It became about the characters within that kind of shtick. And because of her performance and the aesthetics in general of the film, it blew me away. And not only that, the performance of her as Sky Riley, this pop star who is dealing with the crushing responsibility of fame and her fans and her failures in the public eye, and how that mirrors what she's kind of going through in this Smile universe, was honestly tremendous. I loved her in this movie. One of my best performances of the year when I do that video as well. Naomi Scott, Smile 2. There you go. My number 3 is Fede Alvarez's Alien Romulus. Fede Alvarez is him. He is my guy. Whenever he takes on a legendary horror property, he knocks it out of the park. In my opinion, he did it with Evil Dead, his remake or reimagining of that, and he does it here again with Alien Romulus. The practical sets and effects that he decided to use in this film, he could have very easily gone CG, he could have very easily cut corners, but he built these sets to match the original Alien and Aliens kind of aesthetic, even down to the computer with the old, almost look like the original Macintosh computers. And the performances are, again, we're getting like A+ top tier performances here in essentially a legacy horror sequel. Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson in particular, just absolutely unbelievable performances. David Johnson's Andy is essentially a robot who gains intelligence throughout the movie, so his mannerisms and just his knowledge changes over the course of the film, and his performance is just so layered in that way. There's also some classic imagery of the xenomorph, who is somebody in a costume, which I love. The face huggers, all the stuff you remember from the first and second Alien film specifically, kind of meshed together here in Alien Romulus, and it's easily one of my favorite films of the year. All right, guys, at number 2 is Coralie Farjah's The Substance. Holy shit. Talk about a movie watching experience that stays with you. Actually, that's the case for my top 2, and I was battling which was 1 and which was 2. The Substance is my runner-up. This is a body horror film that would make the Cronenbergs squirm at their family gathering. Coralie Farjah does so many great things with giving you the commentary for aging out in your profession, in this case, aging out in Hollywood, aging out in the public eye. There's also a very stark reference to femininity and how women are expected to look, behave, etc. There's so many intriguing, frankly horrific, but you can't look away images that are close-ups. I'm thinking of Dennis Quaid eating shrimp as maybe the most scary thing in this movie. When we get to the final act of the film, it goes full speed ahead. She does not let up. It is some of the craziest shit that you will ever see. I was in tears from laughter, from being scared. It's funny, it's biting, it's a film that features a performance from Demi Moore that will rattle you to your core. Maybe horror is going to get some Academy love this year, thanks to Miss Demi Moore. I also thought Margaret Qualley was very, very good in this film. The Substance is the one movie this year that the imagery won't leave your mind anytime soon. It is a phenomenal feat. I love Coralie's first film, Revenge, just as much, so I'm not surprised here, but The Substance is my runner-up. And then my number 1 horror movie of 2024 is Nosferatu from Mr. Robert Eggers. Truth be told, I am an egghead. I've loved every single one of his films. The only film this dude has released that I haven't dropped a perfect 10 score on was The Northman, and I gave that one a 9. The guy makes nothing but bangers. It's literally a playlist that I have on Spotify of my favorite 90s rock songs. Just his movies on a loop over and over again. Aside from the craft of the film itself and his direction, whether you're talking cinematography, score, production design, costumes, makeup, whatever you're talking about, the craft of this film is the best that we have seen this year, period. Now, whether it will be recognized as such, who knows? But in my opinion, I did not see a better made film this year. And then if you're talking about the performances, Lily Rose Depp, I mentioned Naomi Scott earlier, and Smile 2, a similar thing here. Lily gives a performance that you should give her every award under the sun for what she does in this movie as Ellen, the object of Orlok's affection. Nicholas Hoult is equally sturdy in this film. Willem Dafoe is out of his goddamn mind as always, especially in Robert Eggers' pictures, and he's doing a phenomenal job here, hamming it up essentially as the Van Helsing character of this movie. The transformation that Bill Skarsgård goes through as Count Orlok, the voice inflection, the mannerisms, the walk, and yes, the look, which of course is a big shout out to the makeup team on this movie, is absolutely unfathomably like anything you have ever seen in your entire life. If nobody told me that it was Bill Skarsgård, I would have zero idea that he was in this role. It is absolutely breathtaking in every way, and it is a film that you will succumb to. Just like the poster says, succumb to the darkness. Go see this in the cinema. It just came out on Christmas Day. If you have a chance, and let it take you over. Let it in. It is an experience. It's my number 1 horror movie. Probably my number 1 movie. Stay tuned. Of 2024. Well, that's it, guys. That was 10 to 15 movies that I loved in the horror genre this year. As the horror guy, of course, I had to give you that list. What did you guys think of this list? What is your favorite horror movie of the year? Did I forget to mention yours? Let me know down below. And thanks for tuning in. I'll be back soon with my top 10 best performances of the year, best acting performances. Stay tuned for that. I'll see you next time in the garage.